In the summer of 1851, the parish of St. Landry, Louisiana, recorded a death with no name, no gender, no kin, only a single word written in the Plantation ledger of Auguste Dubois, erased. The camera lingers on an ancient water-stained ledger, its ink bled into the fibers of time. The entry is dated June 12, 1851, but every line beneath it has been violently scratched out, as if to remove a memory too dangerous to remember. For nearly 170 years, historians dismissed the record as clerical error, until a sealed chest was unearthed beneath the floorboards of the Dubois plantation house in 1938. Inside were fragments of clothing, 2 mirrors facing each other, and a human skull showing traits of both sexes. What lay between those mirrors was not entirely human and never entirely forgotten. Sound, a heartbeat begins to fade in slow, deep, human yet distorted. The narration grows colder, more deliberate, as if descending into ritual. The church called it blasphemy, the family called it madness, the slaves called it vengeance, but the truth, the one no one wrote, is that something walked those halls in 1851, something born of shame, obsession, and a body that would not choose. A static fades to black. A flicker of a photograph appears blurred, exposed a face, both male and female, both alive and not. Title card appears on screen. The androgynous servant. The plantation tried to erase 1851, Louisiana, a forbidden case of obsession, possession, and psychological horror. The Dubois ledger was found by accident, hidden beneath a floorboard, sealed in wax, bound with hair. The voice is low and deliberate, the rhythm of a confessional. The scene fades in, a dimly lit archival room in Baton Rouge, 1938. A historian, Dr. Edwin Price, examines a brittle plantation account book pulled from the ruins of a fire-gutted chest. Every page catalogues life and death like routine inventory until he reaches an entry marked, "The dual servant property acquired, March 1851. The line beneath it reads simply, "Erased, returned to ashes." Dr. Price would later confess that he felt watched the moment he touched the page. He said he could smell something, a sweetness, like rot beneath perfume. And when he turned the page, his candle died. On that fragile parchment, the ink has bled outward in a pattern resembling veins or roots branching, pulsing shapes that seem almost alive. Price copies the passage into his notes and describes a servant of uncommon androgyny, whose presence caused unrest among the household and confusion among the clergy. He traces the record back to a remote property, the Dubois estate, St. Landry Parish, an abandoned plantation swallowed by sugarcane and silence. Every mention of that servant vanishes after 1851. Baptism records gone, labor rosters burned, church confessions sealed by order of the diocese. What remains is a void, and in that void Dr. Price began to hear something, a voice repeating the same word from the ledger, "erased." In 1851, the Dubois estate stood like a relic of arrogance 3 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by fields of cane that never stopped whispering. The Dubois family had wealth, but not peace. Auguste Dubois, heir to a French colonial line, was known across St. Landry Parish for his intelligence, cruelty, and profound isolation. His wife, Celeste, once radiant and sociable, had not left the house in years. They had no children, only silence and servants, 30 souls bound to labor, fear, and rumor. Visitors described the estate as immaculate by day but unbearable by night. The walls seemed to hum, the mirrors were always covered. And yet locals said they could see movement inside those shrouded windows long after the lamps were out, as if the house itself still entertained unseen guests. The Dubois were not known for kindness, but their cruelty was meticulous, like surgery performed on the soul. In a letter from a neighboring plantation, Auguste is described as a man who seeks purity in the grotesque. His private library contained books not fit for the church, his journals filled with strange anatomical sketches, halves of bodies joined imperfectly, drawn again and again. He believed in symmetry, in divine balance, and he believed the human form could reflect God's own dual perfection if only one dared to reshape it. The servants whispered that Celeste had begun to mirror her husband's obsessions, painting her face in 2 halves, one pale as death, one darkened with ash. She spoke to her reflection as if it were another woman entirely. The house was splitting long before the visitor arrived. They did not need a curse. They were already becoming two. Sound, a door slams shut. Distant, echoing footsteps on a wooden floor. In the spring of 1851, a carriage arrived from Baton Rouge carrying one passenger, a silent adolescent wrapped in burlap, with eyes too old for their years. The papers called them an orphan of uncertain origin. The Dubois ledger called them the servant of dual aspect. No one could say where the child came from. Some claimed they had been left at a convent. Others that they'd been found wandering near the levee after a storm. The priest who delivered them spoke little, refusing even to name them, saying only that the child is both and neither. Auguste Dubois, fascinated by the priest's words, took the orphan without question, calling them a living paradox. His wife, Celeste, greeted the servant herself. She later wrote in her private journal, "They stand between us like a mirror that will not choose a reflection. I cannot tell if it is mercy or punishment that God has sent them here." The household quickly learned not to speak to the new servant. The other enslaved workers avoided eye contact, muttering that the child's gaze was like being looked at by your own shadow. Narrator quietly, "They did not speak for the first 7 days, but the night of the 8th someone heard them singing, a hymn no one recognized, 2 voices, rising and falling in perfect harmony, from the same mouth. Sound, low, unsettling humming layered over itself 2 tones, one male, one female. From that night onward, nothing in the Dubois house remained still. Mirrors trembled. Water refused to settle, and the master began to dream. Sound fades into a deep, reverberating heartbeat. The Dubois house began to change, not all at once, but in ways too subtle to name. A mirror would fog though no one had touched it. A candle would gutter in a room with no wind, and always from somewhere within those narrow halls came the faintest sound of humming. The servant was never given a name. Auguste insisted on calling them only the child. Celeste, in her private letters, used no name at all, only a symbol, a circle divided by a vertical line. Servants whispered it was the mark of division, a wound drawn on paper. Those who worked the grounds claimed the child's shadow split in 2 beneath the moonlight. Others said it stretched in the wrong direction east when the sun was west. The overseer, an old man named Bram, reported that animals refused to pass near the servant. Horses bucked, dogs cowered. Even insects seemed to avoid the air around them. Yet to the Dubois couple, the child was a fascination, a proof of something divine or monstrous that neither dared name. The wife said the child was beautiful. The husband said the child was perfect. Neither saw that they were saying the same thing. At night, the servant's room glowed faintly, as if lit from within by a buried flame. Celeste claimed she heard whispers when passing the door, her own voice, speaking words she'd never said aloud. Auguste began spending his evenings outside the room, sketching by candlelight. He said he was studying anatomy. But his drawings grew less human each day. Soon the line between study and devotion began to blur. The house was no longer a home. It had become an altar. Sound, distant humming resumes, now discordant, layered with whispers. By midsummer, the Dubois household had turned inward. Windows shuttered, curtains drawn, mirrors covered with black cloth. The air was heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Auguste Dubois, once meticulous and eloquent, began to vanish from his own affairs. His ledger, once his obsession, grew empty. In its place appeared pages of sketches, the servants' hands, the curve of their jaw, the meeting of opposites in one fragile form. He wrote beneath one drawing, "God made Adam and Eve, but what came before them both?" Celeste's descent was quieter, subtler. She spent hours standing outside the servants' room, listening. She began to mimic their soft, dual-voiced humming under her breath. When the housemaid questioned her, Celeste replied, "It isn't mimicry, it's memory." Narrator, each night, husband and wife drifted further apart yet closer to the same fire. They were not drawn to the child as much as to what the child represented, a door neither heaven nor hell had sanctioned. At dinner, Auguste would speak of balance, of fusing the halves of creation. Celeste countered with talk of restoration, that the servant's presence was a mirror through which she could reclaim her own lost soul. Neither seemed to see the terror growing in the other's eyes. The servants whispered that the master and mistress no longer slept in their bed. Each had begun visiting the attic at night separately. Both claimed the other was already there. Whatever dwelled in that child had split the Dubois marriage cleanly in two, but each half still reached for the same shadow. Sound, the humming rises now echoing from two distinct directions. One soft, one violent. In the west wing of the Dubois house stood a long gilt, framed mirror brought from Paris in 1839. Celeste Dubois had not looked into it for years. She claimed it distorted her face, that it made her mouth too wide, her eyes too close. But in June of 1851, she uncovered it again. She stands before the glass in candlelight, her reflection pale and trembling. The flicker of flame turns her face into two halves, each shifting, almost arguing. Behind her, the servant's faint humming floats through the floorboards, pulling her closer. Celeste begins to speak to the mirror softly, as if confiding in an old friend. "You hear them too, don't you? They don't mean to frighten us. They're only trying to remember." She writes in her diary that she no longer recognizes her reflection, that sometimes the face in the glass blinks when she does not. Other times, it smiles. Narrator, her hand began to wander across her cheek, tracing the border between light and shadow. She started to paint her face along that invisible line, one side white with powder, the other darkened with soot. She said she was helping the reflection find its symmetry. Servants found her sleepwalking, whispering prayers backwards, sometimes standing before the child's door, whispering, "Show me what you see when you look at me." When Auguste confronted her, she only laughed and said, "You love them because they are both of us. You just don't see which half they took from you." Narrator lower, slower. From that night on, Celeste Dubois covered every mirror in the house, except one. Sound, a sudden shatter of glass echoing like a cry swallowed by distance. By July, the Dubois estate no longer obeyed the laws of light. The house had begun to twist in ways no architecture could explain. Servants reported that hallways seemed longer at night, that doors opened to rooms that did not exist during the day. Lamps flickered without fuel. The grandfather clock in the drawing room began ticking backward at midnight. And always from the attic came the faint shimmer of two shadows moving against the light, one tall, one slight, merging, separating, merging again. The house had begun to reflect the soul of its inhabitants, fractured, mirrored, incomplete. Celeste's reflection no longer followed her movements. It would delay, then smile a second too late. Auguste's ink drawings began showing details he swore he never drew. The servant's face blending into his own, their eyes perfectly symmetrical. At dusk, the workers abandoned the fields early, murmuring about the double sun that hung low over the estate, two orbs side by side, casting opposing shadows, one warm, one cold. Narrator lower, even the air had begun to divide. In one room heat, in another frost, in one breath prayer, in the next profanity. The Dubois plantation had become a living contradiction, half alive, half memory. The overseer, Bram, attempted to flee, but when he rode past the edge of the cane fields, he swore he saw his own silhouette still standing in the house doorway, watching him go. He died that night, found tangled in reeds by the riverbank, his neck bent at an impossible angle. Those who buried him said the body looked wrong, as if the bones had been rearranged to make something closer to balance. In July of 1851, Father Mathurin Duval of St. Landry Parish received a letter sealed in black wax. It bore no name, only a symbol, a circle divided by a line. Inside were words written in two distinct hands. Both claimed to be from the same person. The letter begged for guidance concerning a creature neither male nor female, neither holy nor damned, yet residing under our roof. Disturbed, Father Duval rode to the Dubois estate that evening. He later wrote in his parish logbook, "The air stank of sickness, but not of the flesh. It was a corruption of intention." When the priest entered the house, he found Auguste pale and trembling, a crucifix burned into his palm as if he'd held it too long. Celeste watched from the staircase, her face painted in halves, her eyes reflecting two different lights. The servant sat silently at the foot of the stairs, hands folded, gazed downward, their shadow cast in two directions at once. Father Duval reconstructed transcript, This house is an affront to God. You have given form to the sin that divides creation. You must send the child away before the sun turns." Auguste only smiled. "Father, if God made both man and woman, surely he hid the truth between them. We have simply found it." Narrator: the priest fled before dusk, muttering prayers he would later forget. That night, he awoke in his rectory to find his Bible soaked in dew, the word erased, scrawled across the inside cover in 2 overlapping scripts. Within a week, the church declared the Dubois property contaminated by unnatural forces. But no one came to cleanse it. It is said Father Duval refused to preach again. He was found months later, face down in the confessional, whispering in 2 voices. After Father Duval's visit, the Dubois couple ceased sleeping through the night. What began as nightmares soon became something else, a communion of horror shared between 2 minds. Each night, Auguste and Celeste dreamt the same dream. They stood before the great mirror in the West Hall, but their reflections were reversed, Auguste's face pale and delicate, Celeste's coarse and angular. Between them stood the servant, silent, with eyes like glass. When they woke, they would find traces of what they'd dreamt: blood on the mirror frame, fingerprints where no one had touched, and the faint scent of iron in the air. Narrator: quietly, at first, they dismissed it as madness. But madness doesn't bleed. Madness doesn't leave footprints in both directions. Celeste began speaking of the servant as if they existed only in dreams. Auguste insisted the child was still in the attic, though none of the servants had seen them for days. And yet, every mirror in the house bore condensation, as if someone had stood too close, breathing. The cook, Ruth, claimed she saw the master and mistress walking the halls together at dawn, only to realize their shadows moved out of rhythm. One turned the corner while the other lingered behind. Sleep had become a threshold, and neither knew when they crossed it. In one of Auguste's final journal entries, found years later, he wrote, "Each night I see her standing beside me, though I know she sleeps below. The child stands between us, and where their hands touch the glass, something new begins to form. I fear that by morning it will no longer be a dream. Sound, the heartbeat doubles in tempo, then splits into 2. The drip of water turns to the sound of footsteps on marble." Narrator: the next morning, the servants found both husband and wife kneeling before the mirror, their hands stained red, their eyes fixed on their own reflections, waiting for them to move. By late July, the Dubois house had become a prison disguised as penance. The child was confined to the attic under Auguste's command for study, he said, and for purification. No servant was permitted to bring food or water. Celeste herself carried the tray up each morning, her steps trembling with ritualistic reverence. She left offerings, not meals, candles, flowers, small shards of mirror wrapped in linen. When asked why, she only whispered, "They do not eat as we do." At night, sounds began to emanate from the attic, soft murmurs, then chanting, then voices 2, then 3, rising and falling like breath drawn from opposite ends of the same body. Narrator: the household avoided the upper floors. They said the boards there pulsed, that if you placed your hand upon the wood, you could feel something moving beneath it. The attic was not empty, it was breathing. Auguste spent his nights below, pacing, writing feverishly about divine balance and the perfect union of flesh. He drew diagrams, 2 hearts merging into one shape, each line symmetrical yet imperfectly mirrored. Celeste began fasting, claiming she heard the servant speaking through the walls. She said the voice was gentle, familiar, like her own. When Auguste demanded she stop listening, she laughed and said, "You can't silence what speaks from within us." By the 3rd week, the humming from the attic had grown into a full chorus, not loud, but constant, a sound that pressed against the skin. The candles throughout the house began to burn twice as long and left behind no wax. The servants started leaving one by one, fleeing into the cane fields without taking pay. Narrator: lower, the Dubois had locked the servant away, but what they imprisoned was not a person. It was a reflection that had learned to live without them. The first night it began, the servants thought it was wind through the boards. The second night, they realized the wind had learned to sing. From behind the attic door came a sound too measured to be natural, a melody without words, a slow, perfect loop. The voices were human yet not, male and female, child and elder, entwined into a single unbroken note that climbed and fell like breathing. The hymn continued without pause, No one ever heard a cough, a breath, a stumble. It was as if the song itself had replaced the body. By dawn of the third day, the entire house was vibrating, glass trembled in its frames, clocks stopped at 12, even the birds in the fields fell silent as though waiting for the final note that would never come. August forbade anyone from entering the attic. He sat in his study, quill trembling in hand, muttering about a revelation hidden within sound. He claimed the hymn was the first language of creation, the place before words divided the world into two. Celeste, meanwhile, knelt at the attic door, whispering the hymn back. She no longer ate, no longer spoke to her husband. Her eyes had taken on a strange, glassy calm, as though her reflection now lived inside her. For 6 days and nights, the hymn continued, unbroken, unbreathing. On the 7th night, the sound changed. It bent downward, slowed like a record losing speed, and beneath it, something else emerged, a third voice, low and wet, whispering in time with the rhythm. The servant who remained swore the new voice spoke only one phrase, over and over. You cannot divide what was never separate. Narrator lower, almost inaudible. When the hymn finally stopped, every candle in the house went out. The silence that followed lasted 3 days. When the hymn stopped, the house did not return to silence. It simply changed its language. Celeste Dubois began to wander the halls barefoot, her nightgown stained with candle soot. She carried a hand mirror at all times, pressing it against the walls, whispering to it as though listening for a pulse. Servants who remained claimed she no longer cast a reflection, that when she lifted the mirror, only the room behind her appeared. And yet she swore she could see someone moving in it, someone who looked like her, but, calmer, whole, they're trying to show me what I used to be, she told her husband, before we were separated. August begged her to eat, to rest, but she laughed. How can I rest when I have not yet chosen which half to keep? Her diary from that period is nearly unreadable, written in overlapping sentences. Ink bled through from both sides of the page. When read aloud, one set of lines forms a prayer, the other a plea. Together they form something closer to a spell. Narrator, she spoke less of God, more of reflection, of two beings staring through glass, waiting for permission to trade places. At night, the servants heard her in the bath, speaking in two tones, her voice layered with something softer beneath. The water would ripple in perfect rhythm with her words. On August 5th, Celeste smashed every mirror in the west wing but one. She placed the last intact mirror in the parlor, facing the grand staircase, the place the servant once stood to sing. She was seen kneeling before it at dawn, whispering, "Come back. You belong in here, not me." When August found her, she was staring into the glass, her reflection smiling even after her lips had gone still. Narrator softly, from that morning onward, she began to fade, eating little, sleeping less, and speaking only to her reflection, and the reflection started answering. By late August of 1851, Auguste Dubois no longer wrote sermons, only confessions. His study had become a shrine to guilt. Drawers stuffed with candles burned day and night, melting onto ledgers filled with verses copied backward. The air reeked of wax and ink. He no longer spoke to the living, only to the empty chair opposite his desk, where the servant once sat to read scripture aloud. They were not a curse, he wrote, but a mirror of what we buried. They did not divide us, they revealed that we were already divided. Every night he washed the floors with lye, muttering that the house had been contaminated by reflection. He burned linen sheets, books, and even his own sermons, claiming their words had started to repeat themselves when read aloud. Narrator lower, the walls began to blister. The smell of ash never left the air. Neighbors reported that Dubois stopped attending church, sending instead a sealed letter to the pastor, its wax stamped with both his and Celeste's initials, fused together into one symbol. The pastor, upon opening it, found only a single sentence written inside: to purify the image, one must first destroy the frame. On the night of September 2nd, August locked the parlor doors and gathered the remaining servants. He demanded they watch as he poured salt along the floorboards, chanting fragments of old Creole prayers mixed with verses from Genesis. He said the house had birthed a second world inside its mirrors. One witness later told the sheriff. He said the reflection was hungry, that it wanted to be born. When the servants fled, they claimed to hear footsteps upstairs, 2 sets, moving in perfect sync. Narrator, by dawn the parlor smelled of smoke and iron. no one ever saw Auguste Dubois again. At 3:07 a.m. on September 3, 1851, the Dubois plantation caught fire, but the flames did not move as flames should. They spread inward, not outward, as if burning towards something hidden beneath the walls. Neighbors described the glow as unnatural white at its edges, blue at its heart. And yet no smoke rose into the sky. The air stayed still, as though the fire was not consuming matter, but reflection itself. Inside, mirrors began to fracture, not shatter, but peel, as if the silver backing were alive and withdrawing from the glass. Witnesses said the sound was like skin tearing from bone. One servant swore she saw the mistress standing at the top of the stairs. The sheriff later wrote. Her gown was clean, her face calm, but behind her in the mirror beside the landing stood another woman, same face, same calm, only the reflection was smiling. As the flames climbed the walls, the house began to distort. Doors no longer led to the same rooms. Staircases twisted back into themselves. The portrait of the Dubois couple in the foyer melted only on one side, leaving Auguste faceless, while Celeste's image remained intact. And in the final moments, those outside swore they saw movement inside the windows, figures pacing, reaching, as though trapped behind the glass, not burning, watching. Narrator hushed. At sunrise the house was gone, but the mirrors were untouched, each one lying intact in the ash, gleaming as though newly polished. In the center of the ruin stood a single mirror, taller than a man, unbroken, though the frame around it was scorched black. When a deputy leaned close, he claimed the reflection was wrong. The house behind him appeared whole, untouched by fire, and in the window within that reflection, someone was standing, watching him. Narrator lower with slow fade. He swore the figure smiled, then raised a candle, and behind it a second figure did the same. The Dubois estate lay in ruin for over a decade, but one object refused decay: the mirror, 6 feet tall, black frame, untouched by fire, weather, or time. In 1862, it was transported to Baton Rouge for study at the Louisiana Institute of Natural Philosophy, a place known for examining unexplained material phenomena. The men who handled it claimed the glass was cool even under torchlight, and that their reflections lagged by half a second. When they blinked, the images inside blinked after. It appears to possess properties inconsistent with natural optics, wrote Professor Albert Gage, head of the institute. The reflected image seems to act as a distinct entity, not bound by the subject's movement. One assistant, Dr. Merville, conducted an experiment. He placed the mirror in a sealed chamber and stood before it, reciting Genesis 1:27, "So God created man in his own image." When he reached the final line, he reported that his reflection did not move its lips. Narrator hushed. 2 days later, Merville was found dead in the chamber. The glass bore 2 handprints, one on the outside and one beneath the surface. After that, the institute forbade further testing. The mirror was locked in the sub-basement, recorded only as artifact 1851L, but janitors claimed that when the lights went out, they could still see movement, faint shapes, gliding behind the glass, as though an entire house existed within it. A night watchman resigned after hearing what he described as a voice humming a church hymn backwards. When he turned on his lantern, his reflection was already smiling. Narrator: the mirror was sealed behind iron plating in 1873, but the plates rusted from the inside, and the sound of humming never stopped. In 1889, the Louisiana Institute closed its doors after a fire destroyed most of its lower archives. When the smoke cleared, artifact 1851L was missing. No record of removal, no signature, no witness. For 20 years, the mirror's location remained a mystery. Until 1909, when a wealthy collector named Harold Bellamy purchased an unlisted restoration piece from a New Orleans broker. It arrived at his estate in a wooden crate lined with salt. No invoice, no return address. Bellamy's journal records his fascination immediately. The glass is pristine, too pristine. It does not gather dust. When I pass before it, I feel the air press against my back, as if something stands just behind me. Within months, the staff began to resign. Several complained that their reflections did not match their movements. A maid claimed she saw Bellamy standing behind her in the mirror, though he was away in town that day. Narrator lower, on April 12, 1910, Bellamy sealed himself in his study with the mirror. For 3 days the servants heard him reciting prayers. On the 4th, silence. When they broke down the door, they found the mirror upright, gleaming. No Bellamy, no body, only the faint smell of smoke and salt. On the desk, an open notebook, half burned, with a single unfinished line, "It's not a reflection, it's a door." Police reports were inconclusive. The mirror was declared missing, again after being confiscated by a private collector, Dr. Leland Croft, a physician with ties to the Charleston Seminary. Croft claimed the mirror had properties of divided consciousness and began conducting psychological experiments involving mirrors, isolation, and prayer repetition. He vanished less than 2 months later. Narrator: over the next 40 years, the mirror would surface 3 more times, each time followed by disappearances, strange fires, and witnesses describing the same vision. A house aflame inside the glass, and a figure holding a candle, smiling. In 1952, the mirror surfaced once again, this time under the guise of academic research. The Charleston Society for Paranormal Inquiry acquired it from an anonymous donor, cataloging it as Object #14 Provenance, Louisiana, pre-1008, 151. The team consisted of 4 researchers, 1 cinematographer, and a priest. Their goal was to document any optical anomalies. They set up a camera to film the mirror overnight, the first known attempt to capture its reflection on film. Narrator low, the footage survives only in fragments. The recording begins normally, a dark room, mirror centered in frame, faint hum of equipment. At 12:03 a.m., static floods the image, then clears to reveal a room not in the building. Wooden floors, a grand staircase, candles burning on a piano. It was the Dubois house, said one surviving researcher years later, perfectly intact, as if the fire had never happened. They saw movement, a figure descending the stairs. At first indistinct, then clearer, a woman in 19th century attire, barefoot, eyes fixed on the camera. Her reflection did not align with her body, it lagged, then smiled. When we cut the power, the image remained. The cinematographer's notes read, "The house within the mirror kept moving. It was aware of us. The priest began reciting prayers, his voice trembling. When the lights were restored, the reflection of the room was empty, but something new had appeared on the wall behind the mirror in the physical room. Burn marks shaped like hands pressed outward from inside the glass." Narrator: the footage ends abruptly at 1:11 a.m. The final frame shows the cameraman's reflection, eyes blackened, mouth open as if mid-scream. The society was disbanded a month later. The mirror vanished during the transfer of its contents to state custody. Narrator hushed. No record exists of who signed the release form, only that the signature was written twice, the same name, mirrored. In 1978, freelance photojournalist Evelyn Hart began investigating a string of disappearances linked to private collectors in South Carolina. Her research led her to a basement museum beneath the estate of Thomas Grayson, a retired surgeon known for his obsession with medical oddities. Among Grayson's collection, preserved organs, antique surgical instruments, a child's rocking chair, and in the far corner, covered by a white sheet, stood the mirror, untouched, towering, its frame charred black. Narrator lower, Evelyn Hart documented everything. She took 23 photographs that night. Only 22 were ever developed. The final photograph, the one she never printed, was discovered years later among her belongings, sealed in an unmarked envelope. When technicians attempted to process it, the chemical bath turned black within seconds, and the darkroom's temperature dropped by nearly 10 degrees. "It was like the light went out of the room," said one developer. "And for a second, I swear I could see her reflection moving inside the negative." Grayson disappeared 3 days after Hart's visit. His estate was found empty, the mirror gone, but investigators found one Polaroid pinned to the wall near where it stood. The photo shows a faint outline of the mirror in dim light. Inside the glass, a woman's silhouette holding a camera. Behind her, another figure holding a candle. Narrator: the FBI classified the image as an optical illusion caused by exposure distortion, but those who have seen the photo in person describe something else, a pair of eyes within the reflection that do not match the photographer's. Hart's final journal entry reads, "The reflection isn't bound to the glass anymore. It walks behind me now, it waits for light." She vanished from her Charleston apartment in March of 1979. All mirrors in the building were found covered in black paint. Narrator quietly, neighbors said that for 3 nights afterward, when the hallway lights flickered, they could hear a faint voice humming through the vents. The official record ends in 1979, but the story does not. In 1991, a private collector in Savannah, Georgia, purchased a set of historical artifacts from defunct Southern estates. Among them was a large mirror with a blackened frame and no recorded origin. When the movers delivered it, one refused to enter the house. He said the glass looked wet, as if it were breathing. The collector, whose name remains sealed under estate privacy law, kept the mirror in a locked room. Neighbors recalled strange lights flickering from behind drawn curtains, and on some nights, a sound like singing through water. The narrator hushed. No one saw him again after the summer of 1993. The house was sold at auction 2 years later, and in the photographs of that sale, the mirror is gone. What happened next belongs to rumor. The mirror allegedly reappeared in an art gallery exhibit in Atlanta in 2003, under a new name, Untitled Reflection. Visitors reported feeling faint, disoriented, or overcome by déjà vu. One described seeing a staircase on fire and a woman who smiled too long. When the curator reviewed the gallery's security footage, every frame containing the mirror showed static interference, but for 1 second, just one, a faint image appeared, a man standing behind the camera, reaching forward with an open hand. And the reflection, reaching back, narrator slow measured. Experts say it was just a trick of the lens, that glass remembers nothing, that reflections cannot survive without the bodies that cast them. But the final line of the curator's report says otherwise. The mirror was found fogged from the inside, as if something on the other side had been breathing. Sound, deep inhale. Then silence. Narrator softly, almost whispered, "If you ever see it, you'll know it by the way it looks at you, not as a reflection, but as a memory waiting to be reclaimed."